Thank you. Thank you for putting this on and the volunteers. This is just incredible. Really appreciate being here. In Detroit, I've never been to Detroit, and I lived in New York City, and I was kind of expecting it to be like that, but it's not, right? It just seems like there's nobody living down here. It's like all financial business. So it's kind of interesting from that standpoint, walking around the city, and it's like a lot of these buildings are abandoned. It's just so cool. I don't know what it just is so cool. So I personally think that remote viewing, I'll explain what it is because some of you may not know, has the potential to change the world. Now, you know, not just this perceived outer world we think is outer, but the inner world, our own inner worlds. Inner and outer are one and the same thing. But, you know, you might find that a little bit silly because remote viewing comes from the military-industrial complex. And so for those of you that are, you know, keen on being awake and empowered and are awake and empowered, you may not want to go that path, right? Just because of that connection, that dark connection. But it does. It has the potential to change the world. And I'll get to that throughout my talk as I tell you these stories on what I went through. So my name is John Vivanco. I've been in the remote viewing field for over 20 years now. When I got involved, and I did not know what to expect, and it was weird, and it is weird. I was a guy who was an artist. I have a degree in fine art, and I heard in 1995 when the remote viewing project Stargate became declassified. I heard that, you know, that Ted Koppel report. I'm dating myself here. Ted Koppel, you know, the guy, the talking head, it was like on at 11 at night. He started to talk about remote viewing and how it's this psychic technology, and he said psychic spies. So the moment he said psychic spies, my eyes started twitching, and if I had a metal plate in my head, it would have been heating up. I'm like, what's that? What's that? So I had to learn it. So, you know, melding technology, this idea of technology, which really isn't like, you know, circuitry and whatnot. It's the way you approach it on paper. So they can just call it a technology. I had to figure it out. I had to learn it, even though I really didn't have any background in psychic functioning, not so much of an idea about it. I was open to all of it. I had been a Zen practitioner for a long time, actually ever since I was a kid because of my parents. I was baptized Catholic, but that was kind of, you know, as an insurance policy, so I can explore this stuff. But I had that Zen background, which sort of opened me up and allowed me to be able to explore things. So when I heard that, we're talking 1995, you know, there's not much of an internet at that point in time, but the weird thing was that there were already these ex-military guys out there selling these programs to learn remote viewing. And I thought that was strange because it had just been declassified, so I did not want to learn from those type of people. And I, over the next 2 years or so, was able to cobble together, because some of it was leaking onto the internet. So I figured out how to do it myself at first, how to do the process of remote viewing. And I found that it worked for me, right? And then after that, I got formal training. And I was trained by someone named Prudence Calabrese, who was trained by military. And I did not want to go with ex-military. Now, one of the things about me was that because I was an artist, all I did in, you know, creating artwork was to describe how light falls on a surface. That's it. And that means describing things in a very physical way. You come to find out that, you know, people, we don't really look at our world in this direct physical to physical way. We live through all these concepts and metaphors and ideas about what is happening, and people who learn remote viewing will often describe things in that way through all these concepts and metaphors as opposed to, oh, it's a table, or oh, it's a hotel. They won't do it that way. They will describe it as concepts and metaphors. So because I have that training behind me, it naturally translated into being what we call a very physical remote viewer. So from there, because they recognized that, I got pulled into a think tank as a professional remote viewer pretty quick. And so I was working full-time as a remote viewer. I was doing about 3 sessions a week, or 3 sessions a day, 5 days a week. Kind of, we're pumping what we call binaural beats into our head to get us into a theta zone. And so half the day I'm just drooling and just drawing. I mean, it's really great for agoraphobes because you don't have to leave the house, yet you can know what's going on outside. It's kind of like agoraphobes unite under the umbrella of remote viewing. And, I had a history of agoraphobia, just comes from my mom, so it was this like sort of natural slot for me, I would come home from school, she'd be wearing her red bathrobe, chain smoking, looking out the window and playing solitaire. So yeah, remote viewing. So for me, remote viewing, it wasn't so much about being psychic. I wasn't, our subconscious, our supraconscious, our spirit guides, they'll guide us through our lives in this way that we're almost blind to at times until you begin to look at why you're doing things, what you really want to do. And for me, when I was a child, I had this repeated experience of, my parents called him my imaginary friend, but it wasn't really that because this guy was actually a traveling accountant who had a heart attack. And I don't know why I would ever have a traveling accountant who had a heart attack at 3 years old as my imaginary friend, right? So anyway, I was in my room. He had showed up before, but I was in my room this one time, and I know I was about 3.5 years old because what I was doing was I was playing with words in my head, and I was learning language right at that point, and I was learning how to think. And we all go through that process. And I used to call them my secret words. So I used to go kind of like hide in the corner of my room and go, just chat in my head and repeat what my parents were saying, repeat words I heard through the day, because it was fun to play with the secret words. So one time on my bed when I was doing that was this man. And he had this mustache, and he had these big glasses, like big, thick frame, black 70s glasses. He's wearing one of those kind of pea yellow suits that they wore in the 70s with the big collars, and he had a suitcase, floppy hair. And he told me his name was Mr. Kasi, and he died of a heart attack. And now I don't believe that he was probably not a human. But to my 3.5-year-old mind, he was this traveling accountant. Why would, anyway. So he tells me that I have to remember before the secret words, the time before the secret words. So I didn't know what that meant back then. It was just something that drifted into my subconscious and stayed there. And so everything that I've done in my life is that journey to understand what comes before words. So when I went to art school, that was just to find the root of creativity, because when you're engaged in an art form, you're going into a different realm, into a meditative zone where you don't have words, you don't have language, right? I lived in a Zen center for a while. For about 6 years. And that was, this monastic life of being in a zone of no words, just meditating all day long, 10 hours a day. So it's always been this. Remote viewing is this as well, right? It's this as well. So remote viewing, what is it? What is remote viewing? So In the 1960s, late 1960s, early 1970s, you had the Soviets. They were developing psychic spies. Now, the Soviets had kind of a different tact than the Americans on how to deal with psychics and what psychics would do. They were more on the side of getting into somebody's head and influencing them, where the Americans were more on the side of espionage, using it for that purpose. So the CIA had heard that they were doing this. There was this program. And whether it sounded crazy or not, they had to at least investigate to see if this was possible, because up to that point, it was thought that psychic information was real, in parapsychology circles. It was real, but it was totally uncontrollable, totally hit or miss. One moment it could be on, the next moment it could be off. There was no way to repeat it, because one of the big problems in psychic functioning, especially when you're in the research zone, is how do you ask a psychic a question without asking them the question? How do you get an answer to something without telling them what the question is? And that's really the big problem. And so it was Ingo Swann, who was a natural psychic, Hal Puthoff, and Russell Targ, mainly these three people, who were developing the program, trying to figure out. So they had 3 months to figure out if they could do something with this, if they could make it repeatable. Now, Ingo, he was this natural psychic from New York. He was an artist as well, natural psychic. He was brought into the program, very A personality. He had a couple months to help Targ and Puthoff figure it out. Now, they were doing stuff like, the Zener cards, where they have symbols on the cards, maybe 5 different cards with 5 different symbols, and they'd sit psychics down and say, guess what symbol it is. I mean, that becomes incredibly boring for psychics. That is, you find this bell curve where it's like maybe 2 or 3, and then you're grounded out. It's just horribly, horribly boring. So then they tried the Outbounders. That was cool because, you had these guys with big 70s haircuts and glasses and turtlenecks, and they're rushing to locations so the viewers can describe where they are through their eyes, which was a cool concept, and it really worked. The psychics would sit there and draw where these people were, and it was totally accurate, right? But the problem was, how do you use that for espionage purposes? You don't. I mean, if you could send somebody to a site, then why would you send psychics? Why would you have psychics, in that whole process? So Ingo was a cool guy. He didn't want to go back to New York and be a starving artist like he was. So he grabbed a bottle of scotch, and this was, a couple weeks before the end of the program. If they didn't find anything, it was done. He grabbed a bottle of scotch, went back to his hotel pool, and drank himself into a stupor while floating in the pool with the question of, what's the address system that we use to send psychics to? Because he realized they needed some kind of address system, So he was sitting there barely able to float anymore, holding on to the edge of the pool, and he heard coordinates in his head. Coordinates. So, those drunk ideas usually aren't very good, but this one was the core of remote viewing. So when he sobered up, what it was that coordinates of the Earth. So if you give somebody a coordinate of anywhere on the Earth, because there are millions of them, you can't guess, you can't memorize what's at every single one of them, then you've got your address system. So interestingly, you had Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. So they were laser physicists. They had a bunch of inventions to their name already. They didn't like the idea of coordinates because, they could not explain it from a physics standpoint. And they had to, go back to the bosses at the CIA and explain it from that standpoint. So they really didn't want to test that. But Ingo pushed them, and finally they did. and they found that it actually worked. It actually worked. You don't have to tell the psychic what to look at. You just give them a number. So they took it to the CIA. The CIA gave them some coordinates of some of their secret sites, and they had to classify the remote viewing data because it was dead on. And that kept Ingo in a job. So they kept going with the program. They were using natural psychics, what they called natural psychics. Now, these were people who had their own, probably most of you in here have been practicing some type of psychic functioning for a while, at least exploring it. And you realize you begin to develop your own pathway in it, your own tells, your own way to understand what you're getting, the information. And that's what it was with these psychics. They were also starting to get to retirement age. And so what Ingo and Hal Puthoff did was create a remote viewing methodology. So, on the one hand, you've got the coordinate system. That's called the protocol, how you task a remote viewer by giving them a number. Then you've got a methodology, which is how you begin to put it out on paper through this very strict structure. Now, the old-time remote viewers, they would have none of it because the methodology, they had their own methodology. So what we do today in remote viewing, what most do, is use this methodology that was created along with that remote viewing protocol. At one time, it was realized that this structure of coordinates is kind of a conceptual structure of tasking a remote viewer. So if it's a conceptual structure for number to location on Earth, you can change that to just a random 8-digit number and then write down whatever you want the remote viewer to view. Really simple. And the number is tied to the tasking by intent. I'm going to show you how it works just because it'll make sense later on when I'm talking about how I run projects and how kind of strict we are on running them. So this is a basic tasking these days. So now we don't use coordinates, we just use a random number with what the viewer is supposed to view. The remote viewer only gets the number, and they don't know what they're going to view. They only get that number. Then they run through their procedure, and you have a bunch of information on something. Now, the way we work it is that we work in teams of remote viewers. So I'll use probably about 5 remote viewers per project that I work on. And for instance, if they viewed that, you got 5 remote viewers. We call them blind because they only get the number. I get back maybe 15 pages from each viewer. And then as an analyst, I cross-correlate the information in order to understand what's there. And this is what makes remote viewing so accurate, because when you have a bunch of different psychic people or remote viewers, some of them may be off a little bit in one session. Next session, they could be really on. And so when you have a team of them, they kind of sort of carry each other with the data. And that's why we can create such amazing and precise pictures of things that we look at. So that's a basic tasking. We could also look at the future. So this is 2002. That's not the future. That was the future. I'm jumping ahead. So we already know who wins that one, right? Because we already viewed it. That's why I say it's not the future. This type of tasking is, because it's future related, we run into kind of issues on future related taskings, because not everything that we view in the future will happen because of probability and the remote viewers collapsing the wave function. But I'll get to that. Now this gets really bizarre when a remote viewer collapses wave functions and things go awry, and it actually has an effect on future events. And then we can task on things that we may think have happened, right? So ideas, conspiracies, and stuff like that. But when we task on conspiracies, one of the important ways to task is we want to know why we want to know, ultimately, because oftentimes remote viewers will pick up the story of the conspiracy instead of the reality of it. So we always have to define that in a tasking. This is an interesting one, actually, because the Philadelphia experiment, that when we view this, and I struggle with this because newer students can get freaked out by this kind of stuff, but I've tasked this on new students as well. And we have people that are kind of stuck in metal. We have a portal forming, huge electromagnetic energy, and just people that are writhing and sort of merging with a structure. Really fascinating. So, we found that Philadelphia experiment they were trying to actually transport a ship through a wormhole or make it disappear. The US Navy did. So, I'm mentioning tasking methods just because it's going to help you understand how we work and pretty much kind of the efficacy of the data and what we put out there. So jumping back, you kind of have a basic idea of how remote viewing works. And so I was brought in to a think tank called Transdimensional Systems as a professional remote viewer. And we were the only civilian think tank that was successful within the realm of remote viewing. We were successful only for a period of time because we were eventually shut down because remote viewing was sort of it was in a controlled declassification. So the way remote viewing was given to the CIA from the DIA, from the Defense Intelligence Agency. The CIA, they're masters at social engineering. So they were the ones that were to bring it out to the public. And you have to understand that they can't come out and tell you, hey, everybody, there's this amazing thing you can do where you can know all of our secrets, right? They're not going to do that. There is no way they're going to do that. But the reason they declassified it was because there was going to be a huge document dump going to Russell Targ, one of the creators of remote viewing, on what they were doing at Stanford Research Institute, because a lot of that stuff wasn't classified. And it would lead people into realizing that the US government was paying all this money for psychic spies. And that was kind of an embarrassment. And it also allowed them to drive another aspect of the project even deeper into the blackness of black projects. So what happened for me when we were doing this was, I was just this artist, this guy that was obsessed with the idea of a psychic spy and technology, and all of a sudden I was thrust in this world of spy versus spy. I had to learn how to know when somebody was following me because we were getting followed. I had to learn how to meet people surreptitiously in order to exchange information, dead drops, and just all this crazy stuff. I would go out to the grocery store, I'd come back, my doors would be open, and furniture would be rearranged in my house. Be on the telephone, we had like landlines back then. It was like late 90s, early 2000s. And the line would click and someone would come on the line, be talking to a friend, someone else would pop on and say, stop what you're doing or we'll kill you. And my friend would ask me, why did you say that to me? I didn't do anything wrong. Like, no, it's something else. Don't worry about it. So this would happen on a regular basis. Eventually what happened was I began to run the think tank in conjunction with Prudence Calabrese. And, I was okay with that kind of stuff. I could deal with it. But when it came to our remote viewers, if they started to go after them, then that's where I had to draw the line, where we both drew the line, and we had to shut things down. But in the journey of remote viewing for me, it was so, from the very beginning, there were these marker points where I came to realize that things aren't what I thought they were. From the side of the government's not going to mess with you if you're doing something that's not illegal. Even that, right? I mean, they will mess with you. They will mess with you. But the other side of it was, well, I'll give a demonstration. So we were at somebody's house, and we were all remote viewing. We had monitors. Monitors will basically keep you from drooling and falling on your paper while you're doing a session, because oftentimes you'll just kind of drift off. See, we're listening to binaural beats, and that is, you probably all know about them, but we listen to those in the theta range to drop our brain waves from beta. We're in beta. I'm in beta right now. And then alpha, which is a little slower meditative. Theta is that zone that we like to dip in and out of. And theta is right before delta. And theta is that area where you get the hypnagogic visions. And that's where we like to go when we can with remote viewing. We don't have to. So anyway, I'm doing this session, right? And I have a monitor, and I keep drawing this and feeling and experiencing this person who's inside a house, and the house is on fire. And it's a struggle, and I'm describing, kitchen appliances, chairs, tables, couches, fire. I get these little, every once in a while, feelings of heat on my body. And then I would jump to this other scene of this other person in this structure that's metallic. It's like girders in it, and they're looking through scopes. And I would jump back and forth and back and forth. So my monitor got frustrated with me and said, okay, this is what I want you to do. I mean, I'd been doing this for probably about an hour, jumping back and forth. He said, I want you to go to the door of the house that's on fire, and I want you to go out, open it and go outside. Okay, so I stood up, and I closed my eyes, and I walked to the door. And as I was walking to the door, it was like the scene came into focus, and I could actually see everything. I opened the door up, and I stepped outside, and I'm looking around, and I start freaking out because I start to feel heat all on me. I could feel like my skin almost bubbling. And I start running in place, and I'm screaming. So there's other remote viewers who are in the room doing their work as well. And I start screaming, I'm in Dresden, I'm on fire, I'm in Dresden, I'm on fire. And I'm yelling this, and everybody stops what they're doing, and they're just looking at me like I'm insane. But I get the feedback, and it is the firebombing of Dresden. And, we're blind, so I don't know until I'm given the feedback. And I had burn marks. I literally had burn marks all over me for about 15 minutes. So this was this lesson that I had with remote viewing, because up to that point I thought, okay, I'm just sort of this anthropologist taking notes when I'm remote viewing something, but it's not like that. You get affected and you affect just by doing it, right? And the other thing too is that, I gotta wonder if anybody was even, interested in watching with the city being on fire and all, if they saw some faint ghost screaming as it ran down the street, So that was really an interesting lesson for me. And then another one was, we were working a treasure hunting. Remote viewers love to do treasure hunting because, well, they're agoraphobic and they can experience, the outdoors from the sessions and amazing finds, right? No, it actually provides a nice break to corporate type work. So we would do some treasure hunt stuff. And so again, we were all, at this person's house, remote viewing as a team. We had a monitor, and I was doing a cool down period beforehand during this session. We'll listen to binaural beats and cool down for about 20 minutes. I'd probably been doing it about a half an hour though. And I'm just sitting there in my imaginary zone. It just appeared before me of this just a cave alcove with nice warm water and sand, and I'm just dipping my feet into it and just feeling it. And out of the sidewall comes this hairy little creature that looked like a miniature Bigfoot. And he starts dancing around and jumping, and he's saying, "The next session, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you." I'm like, I don't know what you are, but you're probably my imagination. And if you are something, then, but I thought it was just my imagination playing with me. So we get to the session, and I have a monitor, right? And I don't know it's a treasure. We're going after the treasure. The monitor does. And I start the session. Now we're in a garage, and the sun's going down. We're in this spooky garage. There's spider webs everywhere. And I'm sitting there doing my session, and like early on in the session, I get this subject. Now, I'd forgotten about what happened in that cool down space because, that's just one of those places where you forget everything. When you go into theta, you forget what happens. You just forget everything. And it's actually good to remote view from that space, You get rid of your ideas about things. So as I'm doing the session, I start to get a subject, and it's the same subject that was in that cool down. And I didn't put two and two together yet because my brain wasn't working in that way. And all of a sudden, I'm describing this subject as a trickster, and it's strange. It's jumping around me. And all of a sudden, my shoulder starts tingling, and then clamp, it grabs my shoulder, and it's gripped it hard. And I just calmly write, subject is grabbing my shoulder really tight. And I look up at my monitor and I go, "Marty, what do I do?" And he's all, drop your pen. Because, that's what we do to let go of things. Like, drop my pen, okay, as if that's going to make it better. And so it didn't stop. And so the whole session, I'm like, I'm trying to remote view. I'm trying to get the data that we need to get. But the whole session, this thing was attacking me, and it would grab my leg. So if you've ever been grabbed by a non-physical being, it feels just like you're grabbed by a physical being, right? It will grab you, and you'll feel it. So the whole time, we're getting completely freaked out. The sun's going down. There's cobwebs everywhere. We're in this garage. And okay, at the end of the session, it was totally messed up. It didn't work out. Marty did a cool down beforehand as well, and he's shaking, and he picks up his piece of paper, and he shows me the picture that he sketched before the session. It was the same being. And we look at each other, and we just bolt inside the house. We're both like trying to slam through the door at the same time. Just freaked out, right? Because I wasn't used to that kind of stuff. I wasn't, that's the unseen. I had grown up with ghosts. I had grown up with getting pulled out of my window by, that's a whole other thing, aliens. But at that, I wasn't expecting that. We weren't expecting that. And we get into where the other remote viewers are working, and every single viewer had the same sketch of this being, and they all got harassed by this being so they wouldn't get any information. What we find out on the feedback was that it was the Lost Dutchman's mine in Arizona, which is one of those locations that, there are a lot of people that disappeared looking for that. There are a lot of people who have died looking for that. And it's a trickster being that's protecting. And so you find this with a lot of these treasure objectives that you've got, blood money as well as other beings protecting them. The dreaded treasure curse. So that was the other thing too, is that, when you're going to sleep at night or you just close your eyes and you see images, or you see faces going by, well, those are beings. There's more of them out here. In fact, I feel them everywhere here and see them. There are more of them than there are of us. I mean, they're everywhere. They're circling everything. Everybody brought them with them too, It's like your entourage. So those were really interesting moments, we were working for intelligence, right? So we weren't working for the C blank I hate saying that, the acronym. I just don't like it. So CA, you guys know what I'm talking about. We were working with people like captains of intelligence, mid-level managers in the DIA, Energy Department, did a lot of counter-terror work for the FBI. We're also working with corporations. At that time, it was there was a news article that came out that Sony Entertainment was using psychic spies to remote view future technology. So because of that article, the whole field went insane on the corporate side. You had people like Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison, anybody in technology. They're like, we got to learn about this. We have to figure this out. Is this something usable for us? If Sony's doing it, we can't be left behind. It's like the U.S. and the Soviets. So because we were at the forefront, we had an investor who had put a lot of money into us, and we were a team of high-functioning remote viewers, full-time. We were pulled into the corporate side. But you know what? It was always this. It was always like, you'd get a CEO opening his back door a little bit and going, psst, psst, hey, buddy, come here. I need something from you. Don't tell anybody. And so we never even signed or rarely signed non-disclosures because they'd leave a paper trail. And we would only deal with people who were on the C level because they didn't want anybody else to know that they were using that kind of stuff. And so we worked with a lot of different companies. We did future technology. We worked with computer companies. We worked with financial. We worked even with entertainment, like Pixar. Pixar wanted to know, they wanted to know about some cool story that happened out in the universe between aliens that they could turn into a movie. So we remote viewed that and created this whole storyline around that. Alien toys, we were looking into alien toys for Hasbro. We were looking for fugitives. We were looking for terrorists. So when you get to the intelligence side, that's where things actually got really weird because, these guys didn't want to know about enemies of the state. All they wanted to know about were esoteric and strange things. And you find this with CEOs too, because you're working, let's say just in the financial sector, and you're working hedge funds, trying to understand if this company merges with this company so they know what to do. And you're going through all the data with them, you're meeting with them, and then at the end of the day, it's like all they ask you about are, well, what's on Mars? Are aliens here? What do they look like? Where are they? That's all anybody ever wants to know about. And when you get into the intelligence side, they've got intelligence, but they want their pictures rounded out on that kind of stuff. From what are those weird spheres doing in the desert, right? I mean, that was a project we worked on for intelligence. There were these weird spheres that were in the Arizona desert that were laid out in patterns. We worked on projects related to Antarctica. That's weird. That was some weird stuff. We worked on projects related to time, where there were issues with some scientists using Black Project super colliders to do something they shouldn't be doing. So the way that we would get approached is, we'd get a phone call, and it would be, need your help. There are these people. I can't tell you where they are. They're doing something, and we think it might got out of hand, and that's all I can say. Can you look into it? Yeah, sure, okay, we got it. So it's not hard. It's really not hard because that individual has their intent on, what it is. So we just take their intent and task around it. Describe, when you saw the taskings, describe what the situation is with what the individual's talking about. And then we'll get all this information back, and then we'll correlate all the data. So on that particular thing, what we found was that there were these scientists who were working with a super collider, and they figured a way to be able to kind of mash time and another dimension into ours so that it created kind of a big blurry zone within our dimension where, number one, these other beings can come through easier, and also it changes the nature of our time, which could be related somewhat to the thing we call the Mandela effect, right? Now, this was before the Mandela effect, but, you know, in retrospect, it makes me wonder, right? So you know, we you know, give them the data and say, yeah, they're doing it, they did it, it's too late. He's all, yeah, okay, all right, yeah, that's what we thought too. I'm like, but are we safe? You know, I mean, it's like, here, this is like crazy things happening. And this kind of crazy stuff happens all the time, especially when you get into CERN, for instance, right? You all know what CERN is. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's the super collider that's in Switzerland. I wouldn't worry. The real weird stuff happens in Africa. And those are a lot of dark project super colliders. Anyway, there's a lot of strange things in that realm that they wanted us to look at that wasn't related to, I don't know, criminal activity or enemies of the state, anything like that. They were also very interested in what happens on the moon. You know, first off, we had begun to map out Mars. So utilizing, you know, the methodology that we use for intelligence or counterterror or whatnot, we use the same thing to try to understand if those structures that you see on Mars are natural landforms or there's something real. And, you know, when I first ventured into that, I didn't know what to think. You know, the face on Mars, and I didn't know what to think because we get in our heads about things and we start to either believe this side or that side. And it's this ping pong, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But how do you know for real? And you'll never know for real until you get the authority figure to tell you. And even then, we shouldn't be trusting authority figures. We should be trusting ourselves. So how do we trust ourselves? Well, learning remote viewing or using psychic functioning, right? That's how you begin to use your body as the instrument to know the reality of things. So, you know, we task, you know, just the face on Mars. And you know, I get all this data back on it. I viewed it as well. All this data back, viewers are blind, and they start to describe cuneiform. They are describing massive columns that are collapsed, dilapidated, these pottery shards in sand, huge rooms inside these pyramids. And so that was unbelievable to me. So I started to create the Lonely Planets Guide to Mars, the Lonely Planet Guide to Mars, to map out the whole Cydonia region and to map out all these structures and what the culture was like, what the planet used to be like, fully inhabited planet, jungle-like situation. Cydonia sat on the edge of this great massive sea, and it was a religious place that people would go to, religious in the sense of their culture. And there was this one area that was not the face, but one of the pyramid. I think they call it the DM pyramid, where people would sacrifice themselves to the culture and to the pyramid. You know, not unlike, you know, what the Mayans or ancient cultures did here in the past, was sacrifice themselves. And what we found with a lot of that iconography in the sessions is very much like the ancient Maya. And so there's this big correlation between that race on Mars and early races, well, human races on the planet, because this planet has been through a lot of different iterations of beings and civilizations. Excuse me. So we jump to the moon, right? Now, if we could do it for Mars, we could do it for the moon. That was interesting because the moon, actually, when there's a full moon, I stay inside, guys. You guys, I don't know about you, but I'd stay inside. The moon is full of all sorts of crazy stuff. We got warned specifically not to write about the moon. If you recall Ingo Swann, if you heard some of his stories, he was asked to remote view one location on the moon. He didn't know he was going to go there. And when the when the monitor found that Ingo was getting beings and structures, and the beings started to notice him, Ingo took off. So he left. The monitor kicked him out of the session, because what happens is that the beings will take notice of you and they will come to you. And this happens in remote viewing. This has happened to me, where beings have showed up. It's always really interesting, because things that have a broader consciousness than humans can be very fractured with a lot of subconscious inclinations that bleed into the conscious, while a lot of other beings have a broader consciousness, or not so much a broader consciousness, but awareness, a broader awareness. So when you remote view them, they know when you're remote viewing them, and they will come visit you. And I had the same experience remote viewing the moon, this one specific location, where these beings took notice of me, and I had to get out fast, because that is not a good situation. We found on the moon even spas for the elite of Earth, if you can believe that. I mean, that was crazy. I did not expect to find that. A lot of bases there, a lot of different beings. It's used as a monitoring platform for Earth. It's beautiful, you know, as it shines there, full moon, but it's freaky. It freaks me out at the same time. So you get involved in a lot of high strangeness with remote viewing. So we were looking at the moon, and on the one hand, they were very interested in our information and asked us about it. On the other hand, we were warned not to go down the path of publishing it, because there are certain things that they just don't want most people to know about. So outside of these crazy high strangeness projects, around 9/11, we were right after the towers fell, we were brought in by the FBI, and we were, well, I wouldn't say we were friends with the FBI. We were more like on their list, because we got in trouble earlier with them, because we were basically set up on a treasure hunting project. This was an interesting story. We were working on a treasure project, and that's how we got acquainted with the FBI. There was a prominent remote viewer in the community who asked us if we wanted to take this treasure hunting project, because he didn't have time. So we thought, okay, we'll do it. So we started working it. I was one of the main viewers on it, so I was blind to it. And long story short, what happened was, once we got all of our data together, and when Prudence, she was going to go out, I was going to stay back for any remote viewing on the fly. And Prudence went out with another team member on our team to the Arizona desert to meet the treasure hunter. So they get to the site, and it turns out the treasure hunter had been digging in a national monument. They go through the gate, and there's a big hole, and he's got shovels. And Prudence said, no way, no how, this ain't gonna work, we're out. And the other person who was working on our team said, oh, come on, you know what we could do is we could jump the fence at night, and we can go in there and get it, because we've got all the data, we know exactly where it is. And the treasure hunter guy was like, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna come back at night, we're gonna jump the fence. So what happened was Prue said, no way is that going to happen. These guys were trying to coerce her into it, yelling at her, cussing at her, and she took off and got a bus, a Greyhound bus. I mean, she got a cab and a Greyhound bus to come back, and so she calls me while this had been going on, and she said, these guys are going to jump the fence. I took off, and she gets a phone call in the midst of me talking to her. So she's got to take the call, She calls me back later and she says that was the FBI, and we're supposed to go into their offices because they heard we were digging in a national monument. So this was literally just after she left the national monument. They had heard that we're digging in a national monument. So we were ultimately set up by somebody in order to, and this was a common occurrence for us because they wanted us out of the scene since we were a thorn in the side and we were doing something that was capturing all the attention of civilians as far as remote viewing was concerned. And we were being successful with it. So there was this effort to shut us down, get us in trouble. So that's how we made friends with the FBI. They ultimately said, oh, you guys didn't do anything wrong, and you're good. So we were fine. So they contacted us right after 9/11, and 9/11 is one of those things where you kind of wonder about. I mean, you don't have to use remote viewing to know that there's, something fishy happening. So we got pulled in because they wanted to understand if the retaining wall underneath the Twin Towers was breached, because those things collapsed and it was so hot down there, couldn't get down there, to check the retaining walls. If those retaining walls broke, you'd get flooding of lower Manhattan. So we came back with data that it was fine, no breach, no future compromise, looked great. So then they asked us if we wanted to hunt for bin Laden because it took them about 2 weeks. They wanted to assess our data up against what the engineers got. And when it came back good, they asked us to hunt for bin Laden. We're like, no thanks, no, not gonna happen. I personally, I didn't want to have some village get droned and a bunch of people die. I mean, bin Laden, even back then, I was thinking, gosh, is this all real? I was wondering, is this real? But, we were watched so closely that, I couldn't even question that kind of stuff. And on the other side of that, the people that we were dealing with in the FBI were, they honestly, they're patriotic Americans, ultimately. These people are very much concerned about the regular person. They're good people, your mid-level managers that are trying to prevent things from happening, that truly care. And so those are the kind of people that we were working with. So we said no, but we would work counter-terror on US soil. So basically, future terrorist attacks, right? So that's one of those taskings, future things. So we were looking at, basic tasking was describe the next terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda on US soil. And we would look at these, they would want us to look at them, once a week, every couple days, once a month. I mean, it varied, but most of the time, it was fairly frequent. And every time we looked at it, it would change. So up to that point, I kind of thought that, well, if we remote viewed something in the future, then it's set in stone. I think, that was my idea. But no, it's not that way. So we would remote view these things and they would change. Now, we didn't really have tea time with the FBI afterwards, and they said, hey, you guys did a great job on that thing. We were able to use your data for this, and we found this and that. Occasionally, we get glimpses into it. They'd show us things, but overall, no, they wouldn't really talk to us after that. We'd just give them the data. But it would always change. It went from this, the first stuff we got was a stadium that was a dome stadium that was contained with gas cylinders, bio and chemical during a sporting event. And then we'd view it again like a week later, and then the bio and chemical would be gone, and then it would be explosions, and then the stadium would change. And so we had to track and map all this stuff down, find out exactly what stadium, what game, what date, et cetera, and give them all that information as well as the remote viewing data. And it would constantly change so much that it would eventually turn into this whole other scenario, completely different. So, I didn't believe so much that they were acting on our information. I knew that at times they were, and they were combining other information with it. But there was something that felt wrong and weird about it. And one thing that I thought really strange was, so somebody had leaked to the media that psychic spies were hunting for bin Laden. And those were the news stories, like all across every newspaper and news program, CBS, ABC. And I'm like, wow, who's doing that? And then I see my name. I'm like, I'm like, uh-oh, this is not good. And so we talked to the handler because we're getting I just want to hide under a table. We're already, right, see, we're already being attacked by this covert group who's following us everywhere. And now there's like this huge public thing of psychic spies doing something. Oh, not good. So we get asked to go on all these programs, like CBS Sunday Morning, Primetime Live. You remember that guy, Sam Donaldson? Primetime Live. I know, I'm like, dating myself. But, so we asked our handler if it was okay if we did, because, it brings in students, it brings in money, and I was freaked out. I had PTSD at that point because, I'm remote viewing constantly terrorist attacks, and I'm like seeing people get, with the plague and stuff. Because when you're remote viewing, like I said before, it affects you. It affects you. You become it. I'll explain more about that later, why you become it. But you become it. And so it becomes part of your experience. If you've remote viewed Mars, the moon, you've gone there. You've been there. I've been all over the universe. If you've remote viewed dinosaurs, I've been with the dinosaurs, right? So the thing that happened was that we started to do TV news shows, right? I didn't want to too much. Prue wanted to. So I kind of let her handle a lot of that, and I went on the edges. Made me feel a little bit better. But, we got word back from the handler that we had in the FBI that, well, okay, so on the one hand, we've got the CIA who wants to eradicate us, and they've expressly told us that. Now, on the other hand, the handler's like, hey, you guys are on an Al-Qaeda hit list. I just want you to be aware of that. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of stressful. So now I'm like, CIA hit list and Al-Qaeda hit list. So I thought I was going to be dead. I thought I would die. That's it. It's all over. But I'm just going to keep going until, because I'm going to die anyway. So I had, lived in a Zen center for a long time, and I had a death experience in the Zen center. So it's okay, It's like, what else are you going to do, So we get to the weird part about the handler. When I said, well, it was kind of weird something he said. He said, yeah, you guys can go on those shows, and we won't confirm or deny anything, but I want you to tell them everything you're getting. What, you want us to tell everybody everything we're getting in our remote viewing data? Yeah, everything. All right. That was weird. I thought that was really weird. So that made me question consciousness and what consciousness does to events if consciousness focuses on events. It's like the double slit experiment. If you guys know the double slit experiment, where physicists, they have two slits in a board and they've got just a blank board behind it. And if you shoot tennis balls are like big pieces of matter. You shoot tennis balls through these slits, they're going to go right through them, and they're going to make marks on the back wall in line with the slits, right? That's basic. Or now if you put water in that whole configuration and you have a droplet of water go through the two slits, one wave is going to form into two waves on the other side of the slits, and then where they cross is going to form even more waves. And on that back wall, you'll get lines, and they call that an interference pattern. So there's matter, and then there's waves. So when you get to the quantum level, and they would shoot an electron using this photon gun. They would shoot an electron through the slits. Well, if you shoot it through one slit, it'll do like the tennis ball, just, dots, matter. Shoot it through 2 slits, it will do dots, but it will also do an interference pattern. So this is kind of a contradiction. It's both a wave and matter at the same time on the subatomic level. Now, the important part of this is that they wanted to understand, physics, is what happens to that electron before it goes through the slits. When they set up monitoring equipment, or the observer, they call it the observer, to watch what the electron does before it goes through the slits, the whole experiment changed. The wave pattern didn't show up, and it only produced the matter, dots, on the back wall. So just the act of bringing the observer in creates a different outcome in the experiment. It's like the electrons, go back to just being matter. So you collapse the wave function. So with remote viewing, and us viewing future events, there's a bunch of things happening. So think about an electron. Let's just say an electron is the event that you want to remote view, and it's traveling in time towards those 2 slits. And let's just say that back wall is the future. So the electron, the remote viewer is the observer on it, right? So we can remote view and capture a moment in time. We can capture that electron just like the observer can, as matter. But what happens to the electron is that it duplicates itself, triplicates itself. It turns itself from one into multiple in order to create the wave function as well. And it's still going to create the wave function. And each one of those waves is a different future, is a different timeline, is a different outcome to an event. So when you remote view the future and it's far away, for one thing, there are things that are going to happen to push it in different directions. Not even the hole in which time and events come out of knows how those are going to end up. Not even source knows how they're going to end up because it's supposed to be that way. So there's that issue, right, for us and the way events change. The other issue, so here was something really crazy. At one time, I was asked to put what we call a qualifier in front of a tasking. So, for terrorist attacks, we would describe the next terrorist attack on U.S. soil, basically, right? You know what to expect. You get explosions, you get violence, you get all that stuff, right? It shows up in the data. Pretty basic. It's going to happen eventually. Now, we were asked, put a qualifier that says, without affecting any event, describe the next terrorist attack. So what was the data I got back on that? Well, it's just a guy riding a horse in the desert. What? There's no, blood and bombs and nothing like that? That doesn't make any sense. So I pull the qualifier off, and we get back to the normal data that you would expect. So the remote viewer knows that they are going to affect the event just by remote viewing it. So they will not view it if you tell them not to affect the event. That's pretty incredible. And I think our handler in the FBI was aware of that right there and having consciousness. He wanted us to say what we got, across all news media. When consciousness focuses on something like that, then it's going to create instability in the future event. Now, is it going to make it happen more so or not so? I don't know. It'll just change it. It'll just create more instability. And so you find this, when you get into a lot of people will do betting with remote viewing. They'll use a system to bet. And they have this thing called displacement so they'll use this, the technicalities of it. They'll say, if Team A wins, describe this picture, and it'll be like a picture of a waterfall. If Team B wins, describe this picture, and it'll be like maybe a city landscape. And so everybody describes the waterfall, and it's super clear data. And so they all bet on Team A. But Team B wins, and they're like, displacement. They never think to look at what displacement is, what causes displacement. But I have, and it all goes back to that observer on a quantum level that's disrupting the future event, you know, especially when you have that many remote viewers viewing something. It's disruptive. So you have to be careful. I mean, we affect everything. We affect everything. So I was talking about how, you know, these beings can take notice of you when you're remote viewing them. You know, we were working with a guy named Ruben Uriarte. He's the Northern California MUFON director, good friend of mine. And Joyce Murphy, she's since passed. But she and Ruben were working on a show called Beyond Boundaries. And it was some Learning Channel show, and they wanted us to, they were going to go to Puerto Rico, and they wanted to, like, they were going to buy a goat in Puerto Rico, and they were going to try to attract a Chupacabra, I think. I don't know. And then they thought maybe, if the Chupacabra ate the goat, that probably wouldn't look so great on TV. So they asked if we would remote view where they could film a Chupacabra. So I was like, I don't know what a Chupacabra is, but I'm sure we could first figure out if it's a real thing or not, rather than just making the assumption. Because in remote viewing, you know, we don't want to make any assumptions about something. We want to go off knowns. And so we remote viewed the Chupacabra first, and it was really interesting, actually. We have this sort of method where we kind of triangulate on things in order to understand the reality of it, because a lot of these things are stories that are made up, and we found a lot of hoaxes and lies about, you know, stuff, and those are always interesting to figure out as well. But the Chupacabra was actually real. You know, all our data came back was something that was absolutely 100% real. And it's not that dog-looking thing that sometimes shows up in the National Enquirer or something that somebody found on a beach dead, right? It's not like a coyote with mange. It is literally this thing that has these sort of little arms, and it's about 3 to 4 feet tall. It's got a big head, and it's bipedal, and it hops and jumps. So it's a cryptid, right? So the Chupacabra, that being, creature, what we saw in our data was that, you know, in part, this was a creepy part, is that when the mother gives birth, the child, the baby Chupacabra, right when it comes out, has to run as fast as it can because the mom is going to eat it. The mom tries to eat it, like, immediately. It is just, it's not fun. It's not cool. But what we found was that there was a facility in Puerto Rico. I come to find out that in Puerto Rico, they do a lot of genetic experimentation, a lot of black projects, especially in the El Yunque forest area. And what happened was there was a bioengineering lab that got smashed up during a hurricane, and some of these things got out. And this actually began around 1995 when the hurricane hit. So that's what we found with that, with the Chupacabra, which was news to me. So next, we were now, I didn't get visited by a Chupacabra. I know you guys are all thinking, it was the Chupacabra that visited him. No, it wasn't that. It was something else. There was this other aspect of the project, of these craft coming down from the sky. And they were landing near Arecibo Radio Telescope. You know that one featured in Contact, the movie Contact? So these SETI uses that, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, looking for radio signals. And these things were kind of appearing in the sky, spinning, and going into the forest. The NASA and SETI had told the locals that they were just bringing their satellites down for service, right? I don't think so. So they wanted us to remote view what those were. So I was the first viewer in, and I started viewing that. I started getting these beings. I didn't know I was viewing it. I was blind. But, you know, being a professional viewer, you can tell where it's going. And I was getting these things coming through the atmosphere, heating up, and then they're coming in the forest, and these beings were coming out. But the construct of their travel was through a signal as well as physical craft. See, when you get into this quantum realm, when you get into other technologies that other beings have and how they cross into other dimensional realms, they'll utilize other dimensional realms for things and travel, they begin to form contradictions for us that are very 3D Earth-based. So these things were at once a signal and also, because SETI was picking it up, also structural. And these beings started to take notice of me as I was remote viewing them in the session. So I bailed on it, because they were very much focusing on me. It's like we use our pen and we probe on paper a lot. And, I'd probe them and I'd get probed back. So I thought, oh no, that's not good. So it was a couple weeks later, I was at home. I was really tired. I was like ready to pass out, and I wasn't sure if it was the pasta or something else. But this sort of explosion of lights happened in the hallway, and I thought that was weird. Something's going on, but I feel really tired, so I'm going to go to sleep. So I lay down, I go to sleep, and I immediately I'm in a dream. Immediately I'm in this dream where I'm stuck in this 1950s like monkey in a spaceship, with this control panel in front of me, and I'm in orbit around the Earth, and I'm stuck. I'm stuck in orbit, and I'm trying to communicate with my remote viewers to do this specialized technique that we have called a communication protocol, to have some aliens come and save me, help me get back to Earth. And at the moment that I think that, I realize they heard me think that, and I see their ships coming in. So right at that time, I'm laying in bed, and I start to get poked, like physically poked. And I'm like, ugh. And I grab this hand and kind of push it away, and it pulls out of my hand. It's got this weird, slick, bumpy texture to it. And so I wake up, and I sit up, and right in front of me is this thing. Oh, I think I have a picture. Actually, this is one of those 1999, 2000 pictures that I did on the computer. It's like got that sort of old, dated vibe to it. So this thing was literally right in front of me, and I'm starting to freak out. Actually, so the Firefly aliens, to me, it looked like this sideways football. So at first I started calling them the sideways football heads, and they didn't like it. So I changed it to something else. They like that. So what happened was I'm backing up on my bed, and I'm like, adrenaline's just gushing through me. Like, what the is this thing? Is it going to eat me? What's it going to do? I mean, it looks friendly, right? It looks very friendly. And I'm starting to scream, like, ah! And it shoots into my head, because most beings are telepathic. Most species are telepathic species. We are too. We just haven't really. It's not that we need to develop it. We just need to tap it. This being shot into my head. Stop what you're doing. It's like throwing rocks at me. So my emotions that were shooting off of me were hurting it, literally hurting it. So, okay, I calmed down. All right, everybody have a little cry. So I calmed down, and I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. And then it said to me in my head, it said, we are from the signal, because that's what we call the project, the signal. We want your help, and we want to help you. I'm like, okay, all right. And the thing just sort of backed away and just went into the lights like that I saw earlier, just exploded into all these lights. So I'm like, kind of hyperventilating and not sure what to do. Eventually I, get to sleep in the daylight, and I don't tell anybody. Well, next night, someone else on the team has an experience, and they describe these guys. So then another person has an experience. So they're coming to us and giving the same message. So, okay, at that point, it's like, okay, I need to reach out to them, because this is real, this is happening. And so we start connecting to them, and they would show up. So their limbs, I stylized it a bit. They had more like these limbs, like a whole bunch of limbs that came off of them. And they were both physical and non-physical at the same time. They could make themselves appear like that. And they could also make themselves appear as just lights, blue lights. They like to appear as blue lights most of the time, but sometimes they show up like that. So I went into a communication with them, and these beings communicate mostly in pictures and in whistle sounds and bell sounds. See, I can't make this stuff up, right? I can't make it up. So that's how they communicated. And what they were showing me was, they were showing me these fireflies. They would give me these images of fireflies, and they would give me the sensation of danger. Danger, danger. And I'm like, danger? Fireflies? Nah. Yes, fireflies. And then they would show me fireflies flashing all in unison, all at the same time, not like one there, one there, one there. And I'm like, okay, well, I gotta figure that out. So I start researching and find out that there are these fireflies in Malaysia and in the Amazon, and only in 2 places. They're called Pteroptyx tenor. And the fireflies that are in Malaysia are in extreme danger. Their habitat's getting destroyed, and they're endangered species. They only occur in 2 places on Earth, and they are not ubiquitous like I thought fireflies were, right? So they go, they get excited and happy when I say, is it these? And they're very happy, and that's it. So they want me to save these fireflies in Malaysia. I'm like, okay, well, let me get my jar and a plane ticket, and I'll do something about it. So we start remote viewing, basically. What do we do about this? How do we save this species of firefly, this other continent and this other culture? And, all the data comes back, and it constantly goes back to this documentary film. And, we have to do this, and we have to do that. We have to get, I think there was that movie, there were some Malaysian actors from a Malaysian karate movie that were supposed to be in it. Anyway, the thing was, we had contacts in Hollywood, and we went to them and, described this, and the aliens want us to save the fireflies, and, they're coming to our house, showing up, and they're talking to us, and They're like, well, let's focus on that story. Who cares about the fireflies? We're like, no way, we're not going to tell that story. They wanted to make fun of, that whole thing, and nobody wanted to, nobody cared about fireflies. So we couldn't do it, So I started to develop a healing methodology that specifically dealt with environments and trying to heal environments, because we have remote healing for individuals, humans, animals, your favorite plants. We could do all that kind of stuff, but we never really focused on environments. So I created this whole methodology around focusing on environments. And we had tested it out. Prudence was on the board of the Carlsbad Lagoon down in Southern California. And the Carlsbad Lagoon had been infected with this plant. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a plant that people would buy at the fish store with their goldfish, have it in fish tanks, and it had totally decimated the Mediterranean to the point that it destroyed the whole ecosystem underwater because somebody dumped their fish tank into the ocean. Yeah, it grows like crazy. It takes over the whole ecosystem. There's no more food for the fish. No other life can grow. And since San Diego area ecosystem underwater is a lot like the Mediterranean, if that got out of the lagoon, it would destroy everything off the coast underwater. So nobody had ever been able to get rid of this thing. Nobody had ever been able to get rid of this thing before. So we started to use this methodology to see what would happen there. And we tried it on different locations after it as well. We kind of found the same thing, is that what happened was this methodology will bring energy to a situation that can resolve itself in the way that nature needs itself to be. You know, without any sort of idea on our part on how it's supposed to be eradicated or not, we bring the energy to the environment and the situation to create a healthy environment, and don't make a judgment on what that healthy environment needs to be. So that's how the healing methodology works. And within very short order, they figured out a way to kill it. And they were able to eradicate it completely 100%, which was the first time in history. This was amazing. Now, it's causation versus correlation. You know, ultimately, you have no idea whether what you did actually did something or not. But we found this with other situations as well, is that it brings to bear outside influences and things in order to stabilize. And so we started to do this on the situation in Malaysia. And what happened over the years was that the land that was being poisoned by the farmers moved out, people came in, created a reserve. The dam that was built right at that time when we were supposed to begin saving them was determined to be the worst idea in Malaysia's history. And so they began the process of tearing the dam down. And so those two things that were the cause of the demise of those fireflies miraculously turned around and went the other direction once we started to focus on it. Again, causation versus correlation. We don't know for sure in the thinking la world, the scientific world. But our bodies are instruments, and we can feel if we had an effect or not. And I think we have to begin to trust our bodies. Oh, they were happy, yes. Okay, so the little alien guys, the Firefly guys, they, so I call them the Fireflies just because, you know, they're not sideways football heads. Come on, everybody. They're much cuter than that. See, these beings are really interesting because, okay, my experience had been, as a kid, like these things come into my window that are super mentally aggressive, and they had big heads and big eyes, and I'd see them out there, and I go, and then I'd get like stuck, and I couldn't move, and then I'd like go out the window, and I'd black out, and then I'd find myself naked in the field, like I don't know what time, it was still dark out, and then I'd have to make my way back in the house, because they never put me back in the house. So they, these guys were totally different, right? These guys were willing to take my freak out to explain to me that your emotions are really intense, and it's like I'm getting punched in the face over and over again, so please be aware of that. You know, I think that the ones that took me before, the Greys, I mean, if they hadn't have, you know, just subdued me, I would have just been, it would have been like Rambo or something. And these guys were willing to work with me, you know? And this is what I find this is a benevolent species of beings. These beings, why they wanted to come here, see, they told me they did not want to deal with humans. We did not come here for humans. And you think about how egotistical humans are. We think everything is for us, you know? But no, they weren't even interested in us. They came to save their cousins. They're genetically related to this specific firefly species. And as this species was dying, so these beings came from an area in the Oort cloud, O-O-R-T, and where there's some dark matter. And their world, when There's something about the light in the Firefly which acts as a holder and a portal for a civilization, for civilizations. This gets really bizarre, but these beings were genetically related to them, and over here it's like an earlier version of them. And as these Fireflies were dying, their civilization was collapsing. So they're coming here to try to save that, to save their civilization. This is outside of the realm of our 3D construct, so it's going to be this different, totally different thing. And we were successful ultimately in helping those guys, so that was good. They wanted to help us too. We have till 3, right? 3, okay. They wanted to help us as well. And that was interesting because that actually went on a treasure hunting project. But the kind of help that they gave was not the kind of help that you would expect. A lot like how you would expect this, healing to work, remote healing, this sort of like miraculous healing versus bringing all these other things to bear. I did a TV show for National Geographic, and they wanted me to hunt a treasure. And this was fascinating because hunting this treasure was something that we had been looking at for a while. And there was a producer in National Geographic that wanted me to go after the treasure, and they were going to film me doing it. Now, the producer became my friend, and we would go to the site before we even filmed because we were, poking around and digging around to make sure that we got the right location for the show, and et cetera, et cetera. So just so you guys know, reality shows are not really reality, right? So we did that. We were there. I would go there. We had all this data on it already, and some of it was unknown, and so we were still doing more work on it. And so I would go there, and there would be this being there, Native American being who I could feel and I could see out of the corner of my eye. He'd always be really excited that I was there. Like, whoa, you're back, you're back. He would say, you're back, and he would jump around and jump around. Like, whoa, what the heck's going on here? Stay away from me, you're a little bit too drooly. And so my friend who was helping me with it, natural psychic, one day she says, have you met Crow yet? I'm like, what Crow? She said, yeah, Walking Crow. I'm like, wait, you mean the guy? He says, yeah, the one that dances when you show up. I'm like, yeah, what about him? And she says, well, John, you stole that treasure. I'm like, wait, what? She said, yeah, you stole the treasure. You're the one that took it and hid it there. And Crow's trying to help you find it. What the heck are you talking about? So this is the backstory behind the show, right? So I'm experiencing all this, and Suzette, my friend, is telling me that this treasure was taken by me, and it was a mission treasure. So what occurs is that during the filming of the show, I was looking for the treasure. Things were getting really weird. Things were getting so weird that I was losing it during the show because I got regressed. Suzette had regressed me, and she took me through the whole thing of where the treasure was. We did this as part of the show, but we did it in secret. And she had regressed me, and when I was going back to the time, I found out that, yes, I was the one that took it. Now, up to that point, I was totally obsessed with treasure hunting, right? I would always go treasure hunting and remote viewing for treasure. So when I was regressed, I saw the whole thing of me taking the treasure. I had taken it from a mission in Santa Ynez, California, and because I was a priest. And I was really, I saw this whole thing play out like a movie. And I was with the Chumash people. I was very much interested in them. I was like a Norwegian person who was within the mission system in California, going from mission to mission. And I was some kind of priest. And I would spend most of my time out with the Chumash, and I became very close friends with them. One was named Crow. So I stole the treasure, but that was not my main intent. Underneath the pews in the church area, there was a vault, and a lot of the ships would anchor off the coast and come and put stuff that they stole. The Spanish would put stuff that they stole in these vaults for later moving wherever they wanted to move them. And I knew they put them in there, but they also had documentation. There was some specific documentation books that I were mostly interested in that had to do with the assimilation and eradication of the Chumash. So I knew about that, and that was my ultimate goal, but I wanted to keep it under this idea or premise that somebody stole the treasure. Somebody wanted to steal the treasure. So I had a bunch of people that were helping me, and we loaded it into a cart, put hay on it, and we were going to take it out to we would just say, if anybody stopped us, we're going to take it out to the Chumash, the hay and stuff. We had a big treasure under there. So we get to this one area, and I see up on the hill, these horses show up, and on one of the horses, I see the man's face. And there are a bunch of native Indians with him. I see the man's face, and I gasped. And Suzette says, "Who is it, John? Who is it?" I said, "No, no, no." She said, "Who is it, John?" And I said, I'm not going to say his name. "It's the producer of the show, who's my best friend." So at that moment, he comes down with other Native Americans, and they start attacking and killing all of us. And Crow, who was my best buddy, he gives me the books and some paintings and a little box full of jewels, and he says, "I'm going to distract, and you go." So he starts jumping around, and he gets hit with arrows, and I go down, and I find this rock. It looks like it's two slots with a back on it. And I go in there, and I slide this underneath the rock behind me, all the stuff that I have, and I just wait. And I hear screaming, there's fire, they burn the wagon, etc. And I get up, and I go out, and they're all dead. They're all gone. Everybody's dead. And so I don't know what to do. My only thought is to go out to the coast because I know I can get a boat to San Francisco. So I start leaving, and there are these two guys that approach me, and they say something about the gold, and I start to get nervous, and they cut my throat, and I die on the road. So I'm dead. My spirit goes to haunt the treasure. So now I'm the dreaded treasure curse. Because it was so important to me, I wanted to get those books because I didn't like what was happening. That was what I did it for. I get choked up on it because it's... So what happened was I'm haunting the treasure. That's so crazy because, it's like that was one of my obsessions. I was so obsessed with treasure hunting. If you want to know what your past lives were, look at what you're obsessed with. It's all you got to do. You don't have to make stories about it. So I am there haunting the treasure. Crow comes and he says, "There's a life that you got to take. I'll be here. I'll protect it till you get back. I promise." So I go, I take this life, I get obsessed with treasure, I learn remote viewing, I do this television show where I hunt the treasure. Crow is sitting there all excited, all happy, right? I don't know that he's the one that was protecting the treasure, but I'm finally back. And in fact, during that time when we were, when he was all happy, when the producer would show up, he would say, "Black heart, black heart, black heart." And I would say, no, he doesn't have a black heart. He doesn't have a black heart. hey, come on, man, tell him you don't, give him some tobacco or something, man. Come on, pour him a cup of water. You know, I would try to get him to, but he would always say, black heart, and he'd take off. And and so what happened was, I found the treasure. I know where it is, but I did not allow it to be shown on television. I did not take them to the treasure because it's for the earth. It's done. And I released Crow. Yeah, that was wild. I mean, that was just unbelievable. So a lot of what I do now, see, I have no treasure obsession anymore. I was greenlit a series with Discovery Channel for a treasure hunting after that, for a whole series, and I was like, there's no way. I'm not going to do it. I found it, and I released it, and that's all that I had to do. So, let's see. What else do we have? I want to jump into, gosh, we don't have much time, everybody. And I have so much to talk about. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what I kind of do now, right? I love expeditions. See, here's my other obsession. Expeditions to strange locations of high strangeness. We investigate using a methodology of remote viewing that we used for counter-terror, that we used for corporations, whatever. It's the same methodology in order to tell you about, to find out about areas of high strangeness. Now, areas of high strangeness are those locations that are, they're full of any type of phenomena, from UFOs to cryptids to just strange events. And you have a lot of reports. And so we'll remote view these reports, and we'll try to understand if they're real or not real. And if they are real, what are they? And what's the narrative behind it? And we run into so much crazy and interesting stuff. Then we remote view how we capture evidence ourselves. So then we go down that path, and things get really strange and fun when we do it. So one of the common things that we've found with remote viewing in areas of high strangeness, you'll find them around mountains. You'll find them in locations where you have a lot of water flow. You'll find them in locations where there's this sort of earth battery occurring. And most of all, there's a magnetic anomaly. So I picked out two locations here, Mount Shasta and Mount Adams. So Mount Adams is in Washington. Mount Shasta is in California. And what you find is that you have a magnetic anomaly. So Mount Adams, when you have a dropout, that's the black, complete black and blue. And with it right next to a huge increase in magnetism, that's the pink. You get strange anomalies. And the reason why that we found out is because, so we live in a stacked multiverse, layers. So imagine Earth is like right there on this layer. This is our plane. All around us, there are other layers, other universes, multiverses, dimensions. So what happens on the magnetic anomaly side is that where you have the increase of magnetism and the complete dropout of magnetism, it starts to squish together the layers of the multiverse, creating doorways where other beings can come through. And so that's why you find in the areas of Mount Adams or Mount Shasta these UFOs, cryptids, all sorts of crazy things coming through. So we did this huge project in Mount Shasta. That's Brooke. She's trying to get through the portal. So actually, this is in Mount Shasta. We find these types of things around Mount Shasta, not just like this into the rock, but also as pyramid shapes next to rivers, or triangle shapes next to rivers that were carved a very long time ago. Now, basalt can drop out and look like this, but when we saw this feature and we remote viewed it, we found that this was actually like Aramu Muru. If you guys know of Aramu Muru in Lake Titicaca Peru, where there's an actual Stargate portal to another world, and the native peoples of the area have claimed that sometimes people disappear into it, so be careful. So we found that this is the same, and so you find these things around there. When we remote viewed this, the same thing. Now, we actually had to remote view what a normal cliff wall is like to make sure that, you know, somehow the definition of a cliff wall didn't change, and instead, you know, it turns into a portal. But yeah, that's a portal, and you can actually feel it. You can really feel the energy coming out of it. It is a portal to another world. You find these all around that area. You also find them around Mount Adams. Now, the one interesting thing, though, about Mount Adams is that this location, you have these lights that pop, usually right in this location, really big. Now, this is pretty much straight up and down, more or less. This is intense. The only place that people go is right here and up there to climb the mountain. Maybe they go down here. But all of this area, these really interesting lights start to form. At night, you know, they'll start to glow big, really big. And you know, there's the thought that it could be a piezoelectric phenomena, because when you get granite that is being compressed and it's got quartz crystal in it, it can occasionally release energy, and you can see it as flashes of light. You can see it as shimmering waveforms, light forms. But no, what we see here are these sustained lights. So we started remote viewing this, and unbelievable. This is unlike any other type of thing that we've remote viewed when it comes to this type of phenomena. And what we have, you know, normally are these big-headed, bug-eyed guys, or a variation of that are trying to survive to a certain degree, right? They're collecting genetic materials. They're collecting rocks and minerals and this and that. This is totally different, and so that's why it was so fascinating. When we first remote viewed the lights, we got this star shape that was forming, and it would start to spin, and I didn't know what that was. You know, the viewers would call it a chariot. They would call it a vimana. This light would form, and then this other being that was actually creating the light would merge with the light and then fly around. And that's what our data had said. And that is also what people witness. Now, the being that is creating this light form looks feline, is very large and looks feline. And that was really interesting. So I asked some people that I know what the heck that star could possibly be. And they said it's a Merkaba. Like, a Merkaba? What's a Merkaba? I didn't know what a Merkaba was, right? But a Merkaba is a spiritual light vehicle, right? It's one of those ancient things where a being can create this spinning, counter-rotating tetrahedrons or triangles and travel through dimensions in a spiritual way. And that's what the data was that we were getting. Now, the viewers were also calling it a chariot. So we also had these lion-like beings showing up. So what we have here, ultimately, you know, when I did some research on it, was that you've got all of this stuff that goes back to ancient texts when they speak of the Merkaba and when they speak of the chariot of the gods. So the Merkaba is a chariot of the gods, and one of those that pulls the Merkaba is the lion. And they basically bring the god, or protect the god, or protect the gate to heaven. It's really fascinating correlation of ancient texts and ancient history with what's going on with those lights on Mount Adams. Just unbelievable stuff. I think it was like they have this whole idea at Isetti Ranch of these lion-like beings that are associated with them. And when we began the project, I had no idea about that stuff. So we just view it because I like to keep myself blind to anybody's stories. And when we viewed it, that's what we have. The lion creating the Merkaba, flying around in it, and you can actually go there and see these lights form on the mountain. So that's one aspect of the high strangeness of that. Oh, you know what? I won't have time for that thing. So, what I want to do is just, I want to point out where remote viewing, out of all of these stories, right? They're adventurous, it's fun, it's exciting. But what remote viewing ultimately does, the way that we do it is that we have to let go of what we think things are. Because if we don't let go of what we think things are while we're remote viewing, then we make up stories. So when I was living at a Zen center, this was a lay center, so I was able to do it. I was living there, taking care of the location. I was also running a remote viewing think tank, and for part of the time that I was living there. And I was having a big struggle with should I be completely monastic and not work in the world? Or should I just work in the world? And I really just wanted to dump the world and just be completely 100% monastic. And my teacher told me, the Roshi, she said, John, in order to be the best, just out of the blue, she said, in order to be the best remote viewer you can possibly be, you have to let go of every shred of yourself. And at that moment, it struck me. It was like, I'm doing everything. I am doing everything. Everything that I am doing is for knowing who I am. Because the process of sitting on the cushion for 10 hours a day is to let go of your ideas of yourself. To let go. To see what's truly there, right? And the other thing with remote viewing, too, is that you are going inside of yourself to understand what's there. You are getting rid of your ideas as they inevitably come up and going back to what's there. So you're constantly in a process of learning how to let go of those ideas that you have. So it's reflective of a very deep spiritual practice. And I honestly don't care about psychic functioning. It's a dead end on the road to knowing yourself, right? You can get caught and stuck in that for lifetime after lifetime. And it'll take you absolutely nowhere, when ultimately the only thing you need to do is to let go of your ideas. But when you let go of everything, everything is. And you can move freely within it or out of it. And it makes no difference. So that is where I am with remote viewing. And the reason that I'm moving this out and creating this exciting aspect to it from the stories that I have and the expeditions that we do is to show people what they're capable of, for one thing, because I think we have to become aware that we are a telepathic species, that we need to develop this functioning to a certain degree within us, but not think it's the greatest thing in the world and completely live within it all the time, or chase every aspect of it down as though it's manna from heaven. We have to have it for our future survival as a race, as a human race. We have to have it for that. But it's a process of letting go and understanding what's truly there, which ultimately takes you to yourself. And so with remote viewing, it creates this exciting platform for it. Because I can't say to people, well, just go sit on a cushion for 10 hours a day, because that's a difficult thing to do. We don't have time for it. But we still have to go through some type of process. It doesn't have to be remote viewing, but just a practice of learning how to let go of your ideas of what things are, of what you are. Because when you go beyond the ideas in yourself, the ideas of what you think you are, there's where reality is. There's where an amazing world is. There's where you stop fighting with yourself, with other people, and know that you're a cloud that will come from nothing and go to nothing. And so there's nothing to hold on to. So, I think that is it, because we are out of time, right? Yep, we are out of time. So if you have any questions, I think I'm supposed to be ushered out to. I have books out there. Oh yeah, we can do it at the table. I'll just go out to the table.
Hi. Remote viewing is near and dear to my heart. 3 years ago, if you have any chance to take a course or a training in it, I highly suggest it. Thank you for all your stories. Or remote. Again, it's a mind-blowing thing. But what I want to offer right now, I took this remote viewing class because I had no confidence in my own ability to be psychic. Yet, I just wasn't believing it. So limited beliefs, all the stuff we're talking about. I teach the Conscious Youth Group, and I taught, in 50 minutes, I tried to teach what I learned in this remote viewing to the kids on the weekend in Wizardry, as well as use this to practice and develop my own skills. And I'll tell you very simply, one thing you might be able to do. Remote viewing is nothing but seeing the unseen. So I had a week of practicing and you probably trained people too. Here's an envelope with something in it. The envelope is sealed, and all that's on it is B246, a code like he was talking about. And you go to that place in your head and you think, B246, show me, B246, and you write down images, whatever you see. I wanted to do this when I got home, so here's what you can do. Take a bunch of magazines, hand it to a friend with some paper. You're looking for images that have distinct lines to them, because all you're going to see when you start out is outlines of images. You're brilliant in the assumptions. You know, if you draw something that's a box, don't assume it's a door, just draw a box. But anyway, I had my sister take these images and tape them onto a blank piece of paper, fold them up, stick them in an envelope, and put a number on it. I got a box of these envelopes with numbers on it, and every now and then I'll pull one out and I'll go to this alpha state and I'll try to remote view one of these envelopes and just draw. And over time, I found that my details were a little bit more. I don't know how this stuff works, and that's the cool thing about remote viewing. Nobody knows how it works, do they?
Well, you know, I think, so for me, okay, there is physics, you know, there's physics ideas, theories behind it, but this is the thing. Remote viewing is not remote viewing. Okay, for one thing, it's not 100% viewing things. You feel it in your body. Everybody knows, you know, you get things through all of your senses. You get these sort of abstract feelings in your body, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes you get visuals. Sometimes it plays out like a movie. So there's nothing viewing about it necessarily. It's much broader than that.
And it's years and years and years of training to become professional like you. So to what I'm just saying right now is a silly little, it's a thing,
really
but
important. Because that's an aspect of it as well, right? But there's this whole other world of it, just outside of visuals, that is wanting to be known. And then the other thing, this is interesting, is that there's nothing remote about it, because where is it happening? Right, it's happening within you. You know, they could have called remote viewing, when they first developed it, demonstrations in oneness. Hey, let's show you, let's demonstrate what oneness is. You know, and they're feeling something that inside of themselves that's over there, and describing it, that they can't see, feel, or touch, right? So remote viewing, the name does not describe what it is. And for me, it's like, how could you do it if you weren't it?
Do you actually offer training or courses?
I train remote viewing. I have a class coming up in September. I have a book, The Time Before the Secret Words. Out there, the book's for sale out there. Actually, I'll sign if you guys want. Yeah.
How do we find out about like the courses or the training you offer?
You can go to my website, righthemispheric.com.
Right Hemispheric?
Right Hemispheric.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.